our volume up? That seems pretty low. So there we go.
We'll just go all the way.
Max it out.
Okay. Yep.
Later. Good evening, everybody, and welcome to City of Tumwater's Planning Commission meeting for Tuesday, October 8th, 2024 at 7 p.m. And our meeting is called to order. I'll do roll call. Commissioner Evans is excused. Commissioner Kirkpatrick?
Here.
Wait, Commissioner Cote? Here. Commissioner Paulson? Perez? Commissioner Staff?
Here. Here.
Very good. Commissioner Varela?
Here.
And me, Commissioner Robbins. Great, we have quorum. Let's go. Do we have any changes to the agenda tonight? Any commissioners' reports? Vice Chair.
So thank you for covering for my absence at the last meeting. Excuse me. I have time to have to clear my throat. To announce that I spoke with Brad recently. My term as commissioner is coming to a close on in the beginning of November, and I've elected not to go for appointment to the Planning Commission. Some of you may know I'm a renter here in the city of Tumwater, and one of the advantages / drawbacks to that is mobility. So I recently took a job in Lacey, and while the commute is not terrible by any means, I am starting to look for new housing options further to our neighbors to the east. So rather than elect to join for another term and then have to resign if I move, I wanted to take this opportunity to pass the reins off to someone else. I've been serving with the Planning Commission since November of 2018. Time really does fly, but I wanted to say thank you to everyone I've served with, faces both new and old, the commission, and say thank you, Brad, and Erica, for this opportunity to lend a voice to the people of Tumwater. So I look forward to this meeting and our next upcoming meeting to end on a high note. So thank you all.
Thank you, Commissioner. That's, we're really going to miss you. Good perspective.
Appreciate that. Thank you.
Any other reports? Brad, manager's report?
Yes, so, yeah, I hate to see Michael have to leave, but getting closer to work was a valid excuse for me taking this position in the first place, so I can't argue that. I just want to make sure that you will be in attendance at the next meeting, then?
Yes, October 22nd, is that right?
Because there's a bunch of money you owe on them. We'll have something formal. Thank you for that. So I just want to make sure you're there for that. The updates. Unfortunately, our overall comprehensive plan schedule has been shifting around a lot because we're dealing with budget issues on the city council side. So, coupled with the fact that some of us have been out sick and on occasions and other things. So, we're falling behind a little bit on our schedule. So, I will send out the most recent updated schedule for you. It sounds like our December meeting, first December meeting, will be a joint session to talk about what we're planning for next year, plus Housing, Land Use, and Development Code. So that should be a packed meeting, but it will be a joint meeting with the City Council, have all the details. Unless there are objections, I already told the City Clerk we're going to be canceling the Christmas Eve Planning Commission meeting. So if you have objections, let me know. I think that's probably it for updates.
Any chance, Brad, on that December joint meeting with council, would it start at their time rather than our usual 7?
It would probably start at 6 PM
Yeah, okay.
at their time, and it'll probably be over at the city council chambers.
Okay. They'll let us know, we've got some work on that. Okay, thank you. Always a good thing to meet jointly with them. All right, Brad, first let me look around the room. Do we have anybody who would like to address, the planning commission from the public? Brad, do we have anybody online from the public?
Doesn't look like we have anybody online, and I didn't have any contacts from anybody before the meeting.
Okay. Well then, let's move to our 7th order of business, which is Transit 101. Do you want to do a lead-in, Brad, or?
Well, since I turned the meeting over to Rob, I was expecting
Okay.
you to do that. So Rob LaFontaine is the planning manager, director, head
Close enough.
honcho, whatever,
Chief nerd.
Intercity Transit, and he and his staff who are joining us today, are going to give us a breakdown of transit service in the area. This is very important because it interrelates with the work we're doing on the transportation plan update. So I think we're ready to go. You know,
Okay.
what you need, or you share screen?
I'm gonna share
There we go.
screen. I use Zoom and all these Teams, so.
Anthony. Okay, let's see if we can fix it up here. That's a little better. Usually it's a bar. Okay.
Okay. Thank you for having Intercity Transit. By way of introduction, my name is Rob LaFontaine, Planning Deputy Director. I have a host of backup singers who joined me this evening. So in order of my slides, we've got Peter Stackpole behind us, that's our Development Director. Nick Damaris, our Chief Communications and Outreach Officer. Emily Bergkamp, there she is. Emily, General Manager. Matt Kenny, Senior Planner. They're my training wheels in case I'll take all the easy questions when we're done. I give the hard ones to Nick.
Too far away to kick you under the table, so
I know.
be careful.
No, but you'll get me tomorrow. Okay, yeah, looking forward to this. It's my understanding, Tumwater amongst all the cities are going through, comp plan updates. And so, our pleasure to come by this evening and share a bit about intercity transit. And hopefully the information is helpful, and mutual as we continue to work together as partners, within the community. All right, classes in session, Transit 101. A few things we're going to talk about, in kind of the first part is just kind of get the lay of the land, our service area, tax revenue, because we are a public agency, the modes of service that intercity transit provides. We'll talk about equity, and quite a bit about infrastructure for this particular group. So mode, start off with a little bit of jargon, I apologize. So mode really is a reference to the services that we provide at intercity transit. Fixed route bus is probably the most familiar. Routes 12 and 13, cruising by on Israel. We also have commuter bus service with a connection to Pierce County. That's our Route 620, operates on I-5. Dial-a-lift, which is ADA paratransit. ADA paratransit is a requirement for anywhere that we have fixed route transit. The regulations require that, there's a third of a mile buffer around all fixed routes, and that defines the eligibility area for anyone who does not have reliable access to the fixed route service is therefore eligible for paratransit, which is, oh gosh, curb to curb or door to door, Emily? Door to door service. I think we have, gosh, I won't remember the number of dial-up vehicles in our fleet, but it's a healthy number. And in addition to our larger fixed route buses running around, very common to see our dial-lift vehicles also out and about in the community. Other modes that deserve a mention, van pool is a service provided by Intercity Transit. For the bottom of the slide, on demand or micro transit, this is kind of the new kid on the block. Intercity Transit doesn't provide on-demand transit service yet. We are closely examining where on-demand service might be practical within the service area. There are a host of other transit agencies across both the state and the country who are piloting different programs with on-demand transit service with mixed results. So it deserves a good, healthy assessment. Bus rapid transit, or BRT, that's mentioned specifically within our long-range plan. We're not operating it yet. Perhaps you're familiar with the project which we call The One. It's a grant demonstration project that operates on the Martin Way corridor. That's funded with the assistance of a grant through the state of Washington to help us kind of trial some of the operational features of bus rapid transit. Over the course of time, we do hope to evolve that service into perhaps a bus rapid transit light version. Rail. Intercity Transit does not provide rail, nor do we intend to provide rail. I won't mention my hopes and dreams for a streetcar. Oops, I just did. Maybe someday before I retire. Sound Transit and WashDOT are the two predominant rail providers within the area. Sound Transit provides both the Sounder train out of Lakewood Station and Tacoma Dome Station with destinations northward, and then the Link Light Rail service that operates both in downtown Tacoma, as well as all over the place. Now, if you've driven I-5 up by the airport, you can see quite a bit of work that's happening with light rail expansion. To the map we go. Intercity Transit is a public transportation benefit area, or PTBA. We are a special taxing district and a municipal corporation, and we're part of the region's local government structure. I say that because that's not always common knowledge. Work in this business long enough, and you just about hear it all. We are for-profit, nonprofit, part of the county, part of the state. People don't know what we are. Well, we are a special taxing district. So PTBA, organized under state legislation, we levy a 1.2% local sales tax within essentially all the areas that are shaded in that pink color, merchants in that pink color. What I have on the right side of my slide is an excerpt from a resolution that's over 20 years old because years ago, Intercity Transit was a county-wide entity. That changed in the late 90s, early 2000s as a result of the I-695 initiative. So in April 2002, Public Transportation Improvement Conference convened, adopted a resolution which does in part to better lay the foundation for increased revenues needed for intercity transit to provide needed urban services. The boundaries of intercity transit should be reduced to include approximately the urban growth areas of the cities of Olympia, Lacey, and Tumwater, with an extension to the city of Yelm. There we have it. That's been the recognized boundary for intercity transit for over 20 years. I have a cute little icon of one of our buses up on I-5. If you'll notice, you'll say, hey, that's not inside that pink area. That's right. There is not a restriction that intercity transit has to operate service inside of our political boundary. It's essentially a policy position of the Intercity Transit Authority Board. And so if it is the policy objective of the board to have service, to a location such as Pierce Transit, that is certainly allowed. Okay. Infrastructure of public transit. Wouldn't be planning commission if we didn't get to talk about the guts. So of all the things I said we're also not a public utility. However, with 961 active bus stops across the network, it can be helpful to think of intercity transit similar to a utility. And I say that because of the sort of the permanent nature of our infrastructure, or what we hope is perceived as permanent nature. My note says the public's investment in transit is significant. It should be considered permanent. Changes in service that result in abandonment of stops are unusual and often inadvisable. My bus stop, not mine. I actually live in Lewis County. I have no bias. My proverbial bus stop, here today, gone tomorrow. Wait, nope, track changes. Here today, here tomorrow. I'm having, a playful time with that phrase because I'm trying to kind of double down on the notion of the permanent nature of the investment in public transportation. Shown on my slide happens to be an approximate location for the bus stops, the pairing of bus stops at Linwood and G on our Route 12. By sheer coincidence, both of those bus stops went offline today because of construction from the city of Tumwater. On the right side of the slide, I've extracted a few demographic numbers, estimates from, I think this is ACS data, suggests that there are roughly 610 residents within the proximity of the bus stops at Linwood and G. What I'm showing is the approximate age distribution. Of course, there are other profiles that we can look at, race, income, et cetera. Point of that is bus stops have an audience, and a good reminder that decisions to change location or remove frequency are quite impactful. And we're very purposeful in our decisions to add and in particular remove transit service. You might notice the box of Legos in the lower part of the slide. My kids love Legos. I love to play Legos as a kid, and I still do. But I think the city engineers would agree that our city is not built with Legos. We don't have the benefit of being able to change it at will, and so thumbs down to Lego City. Unfortunately, we don't necessarily want to be perpetuating this idea that bus stops can be and ought to be moved around kind of at will. Sticking with my here today, here tomorrow theme, mentioned 961 bus stops in the network, and I want to take a moment and talk about some recent business that we've done with our Transit Authority Board. We've updated our Title VI program. This is a document that we present to the federal government that declares our compliance with the U.S. Civil Rights Act of 1964. I bring that up because there's a few things that are of particular interest. One thing that is new, I think folks in the room are probably aware that the 2020 census was significant because the urban area with the Olympia-Lacey urban area surpassed 200,000 in resident population. While most folks probably didn't either notice or frankly care about that, that was a meaningful threshold for many of us, particularly in transit. It brought with it more stringent requirements for equity analyses. So if Intercity Transit desires to make a change to service, we have more responsibility now to evaluate the impact of that change. As I write here, with all major changes, we must identify any adverse impact resulting in significant disparity to populations that are a racial minority or low income. And then disparity is present if the proportion of adversely affected population impacts more minority and low income residents by 3% or higher. Inversely, the proportion, we have disparity if the proportion of the benefiting population favors fewer minority and low income residents by 3% or less. So those are new provisions that we are adhering to over at our headquarters. And then certainly when we are faced with an opportunity to make changes, the analysis that I just described is approved via a public process. Very timely that I'm sharing this because just yesterday we put on our website our first service equity analysis out for public comment. It'll be on public comment through about the next 3 weeks, and we have a public hearing with our board week after next. Madam Chair, I'm open to questions whenever folks have them, if there's something I say that sparks curiosity. Looking back more closely at Tumwater, 113 active bus stops within the jurisdiction. Intercity Transit has been pretty active over the last few years with bus stop enhancements, and we're not done. We have over 150 that are intended to be improved in 2025, with 17 of those in Tumwater. And essentially, when we go out to improve our bus stops, as we're looking at the one in the photo on Linderson, a larger landing pad is usually what we strive to come out. And that is predominantly to accommodate both front and rear boarding and alighting on the bus. One of the fun facts with Intercity Transit is we, for the last several years, have been a fare-free transit provider, which is great. One of the realities of being fare-free is the rear door of the bus is equivalent to the front door. The challenge is not all bus stops are set up to accommodate both front and rear door activity. We've been working to overcome that. To the extent it's possible, when we get done enhancing a bus stop, we like it to be shelter ready. It's not necessary that all bus stops in the system have a shelter. Many of them simply don't warrant the ridership, or we have bus stops that are predominantly used for people getting off the bus, and most people, when they get off the bus, don't need to sit at a shelter. If you're interested in dimensions, there you go. 24 feet against the curb. If we can, we try to get 10 feet off the curb to accommodate our larger shelters. We have a bus stop design manual. That's a wonderful addition to our library of documents, available on our website, with information that's both intended for the development community as well as our public works colleagues. So, looking at the checklist here for bus stop construction, when it's all said and done, of course, we want to have a recognizable and accessible stop. We want to be within public right-of-way. That's not always, we're not always able to achieve that, which in those cases we'll typically enter into a use agreement with the adjacent property owner. However, the majority of our bus stops are confidently within public right-of-way. Supportive dimensions, as I just described, and then the permanent investment. Okay, so we visited our service area, talked about tax, modes, equity, and infrastructure. Now, what's on the agenda, but I might suggest Transit 102, we'll talk about more of the qualitative parts of the work we do. Election season. I'm getting a little bit over. Oh, yes.
I have a question for you, regarding, funding, and the fact that the transit system is now fare-free. Is it true that it was costing more than we were benefiting from collecting the fares, and that's why we went away from, fare collection? Or was it that we got sufficient, we got sufficient revenues in order to do away with the, fares?
Yeah, great question. I think it's fair to say, and my backup singer can jump in at any moment. I think it's fair to say that there was a positive revenue collection from fare. There was a net, value there, but minimal, nominal, you might say. And when looked at in the totality, we didn't necessarily put a finite number on the totality of cash collection. I think if there were that stringent of a review, we might in fact discover that the cost of being a cash handling entity, with all of the requirements that go into it, all of the operational details that are involved, there's a lot of elements to collecting fare that are simply difficult to put a cost to. Right, but I think it's absolutely fair, pun intended, to say that whatever that net gain was hardly recognizable, not impactful in our operating budget.
Not materially substantial.
Yeah, it was about 2% of our revenues overall. And the other piece that the board considers as well before making the decision to go zero fare is it really antiquated fare boxes we were collecting fare through. We didn't have smart card readers. We're not part of ORCA. And so to purchase a replacement system that would really be more technologically savvy, about $5 million at that point in time. And so for the board, it didn't make sense financially for us to spend that type of money on a new system when we were receiving about 2% of our revenues through the fare box. And it costs about $1 to $2 million to maintain that system every year, because it's like any other, system, new technology that you have to deal with and keep up with. So that was part of what drove that decision. And zero fare is actually technically still in the pilot phase through 2028. So we're still looking at the efficacy, and the marketing department recently did a great survey on the impact of zero fare on people's lives, and so great information.
Could I ask a follow-on question to that about the follow-on information? I'm assuming that we've moved out from zero fare, that you still have a way to track ridership.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Okay, and so have you seen with the zero fare pilot, that ridership has increased, flat?
COVID really created an issue there. So in the first 2 months of going zero fare, which was January of 2020 and February of 2020, and then in March, we know what happened. But in the first month, we saw a 20% jump in ridership. In the second month, it was a 40% jump in ridership. And in talking with Nelson Nygaard, who's a great resource to us with national transit trends, they believe that our ridership has bounced back faster from COVID because we are in zero. We're probably hovering around our 2019 ridership levels right now. So yeah, and I think the biggest struggle for us right now with ridership that we've lost is the state riders, the folks that used to work on site here in Olympia, and not necessarily on the Capitol campus locations, but now do remote work, are no longer riding the bus. So it's a big loss, and we probably won't see that ridership remote work for a lot of work sites as a permanent. So.
Mm-hmm. Well, as Emily said, we're essentially at 2019 ridership levels. If we were to look at that, we'd see a chart that looks like the two-humped camel. We'd see, an influx of ridership in the morning commute hours, and then one in the afternoon. Interesting now that we're seeing, again, almost the same volume of activity, but it's gone to the one hump. Camel, where we're seeing, our highest, use in that kind of early to mid-afternoon period. Yep, my questions are great, but I'll keep paddling forward here. Okay, so yeah, election season, we'll talk about, kind of a little bit of our background because it's relevant. About 6 years ago, Intercity Transit was in the midst of a campaign that landed on the November 2018 ballot, which was our Proposition 1 sales tax increase, 0.4% within the PTBA, and it passed. It passed comfortably, which was great. In fact, we had a board meeting, scheduled board meeting the day after election day, and it was ruckus, and I think there was cake. Exciting times for sure. So the new financial capacity to preserve the level of service at the time, which we don't often talk about that, but I think it's worth a mention, right? That the Intercity Transit was in a tough financial spot at the time. That had the measure failed, the agency likely would have been required to go into cost saving measures, whether that be on the capital side or operating side or both. Then secondly, obviously to grow and transform the service within the PTBA. So right after, and kind of in the wake of the ballot measure, we were quick to adopt our short and long range plan, which essentially, I wrote there, it's somewhat the equivalent of Intercity Transit's comp plan, kind of our roadmap, to include a variety of elements indicated by some Nelson Nygaard created icons. Extended span of service, that's the hours of operation, you know, that we operate. Improved frequency, how often that bus comes at your bus stop. New areas of service, our schedule adherence, improvements to capital facilities, we talked about that. The enhanced corridor service, or BRT, which we've got to mention. Late night service, so buses operating, you know, after 11 p.m. Commuter service between Thurston County and locations northward, and then the conversation about fare. At the time, this is what our implementation schedule looked like. We were geared up, ready to implement a whole bunch of things in a relative short amount of time. But then, as was mentioned, the timeout got called, and we went into unprecedented history, as did so many agencies, working diligently to not only reduce the service that we were providing, but reduce the public's use of the service we were providing. Never before in my career have I had kind of the mission to get people to stop riding the bus. That's what we did. That took us through a 4-year journey to restore service. The graph on the left side, really just a visual aid. Don't dare try to look at that size 2 font. But you'll see on the left side the red bar charts indicating the rapid decrease of service that we went through with the onset of the pandemic, to include the blank spot. We had about a 10-week period of time where our fixed route service was suspended. Came back in June of 2020, and we've been on an incremental increase of restoration since that time. Do we have unprecedented time? Yep, 20 unique changes to service, 5 emergency reductions. And then the fun fact, because who doesn't love fun facts? Did you know? We, transit agencies, we measure ourselves in terms of revenue hours. I think revenue is probably a historic, legacy term relating to fare box collection, but revenue hours, revenue miles. So oftentimes people will say, how does Intercity Transit compare to Pierce Transit or C-Tran in Clark County or Whatcom Transit or whatever? And while, the size of our fleet, the size of our staff are certainly measures, the most reliable unit of measure, comparing one transit agency to another, is the volume of service that we're providing in terms of our revenue hours. So that's really what those bars are showing on my chart is our annualized revenue hours. We were excited not that long ago. Again, we probably had cake, because we like to celebrate over at our place. Because we've reached the end mathematically of restoration of service. And our September 2024 schedule, mathematically, brings us back to pre-COVID levels. So picking up where we left off, looking at 24, 25, 26, growth in span and frequency. Looking at uniform service levels on our routes, 30-minute standard frequency, service till 11 p.m. Those are some of the things on the radar screen. So take 2 of our short and long range plan, still the 9 elements that were there. It wouldn't be a Rob LaFontaine presentation if I didn't mention our transit development plan. This is another requirement from the state of Washington that all transit agencies have to submit annually an update to our 6-year plan. And so the document that I'm showing is arguably the single most meaningful page out of that document, which is our planned operating changes. Taking nothing away from the financial documents that are in there, they're fabulous. But I think a lot of people are interested in what's happening with the routes and schedules. So in 2025, we are looking at a 10 to 15% increase in those annual revenue hours. Returning service to the state capitol campus. If you remember we call them the Skittle buses, but the Dash buses that ran around the Capitol campus, they've since been surplus. We no longer have those 29-foot vehicles. The smallest vehicles we have in our fleet now are 35-foot. So we're reimagining our service at the Capitol campus for larger vehicles, working with DES on that. Improved span and frequency in accordance with our long-range plan. As I mentioned, we want to evolve our BRT demonstration project called the One into that anchored corridor line. That's consistent with TRPC's Martin Corridor study work that they've been doing, as well as the City of Olympia's Capital Mall Triangle study. We are preparing to restructure our fixed route, and that's daunting. But as we look at anchoring that service on the corridor, it invites us to rethink about the design, of our fixed route network. With that comes the introduction of new service segments. And then a state grant pending, which we'll hear final results when the legislature meets this spring, to initiate commuter service with access to JBLM. It's not our intent to operate intercity transit buses on the base. More specifically, we would foster a connection with Pierce Transit that does operate on the base. So let's talk about those potential new service segments specific to Tumwater. The candidates for expanded service in 25 and 26, Henderson Boulevard, Old Highway 99 between Tumwater Boulevard and River Road. And then the ones that are kind of on the radar screen, Tyee and 73rd Avenue on the west side, Old Highway 99 and 93rd, the Capitol Boulevard Craft District, and then how could we not get excited about the East Street connector? Yeah. We'll take a moment and talk about density. Got to fish where the fish are. So land use, population, road classifications. Transit supportive land use looks a lot like high density residential, central business districts, medical districts, shopping centers. And so we do follow a lot of the zoning districts of the jurisdictions to help guide the allocation of transit service. Certainly colleges, universities, high schools, other educational sites are meaningful. And then employers of significance, many of those that I've mentioned, plus state offices. Transit supportive infrastructure, which we hit on a little bit, but we'll mention arterials and major collectors. Those are predominantly what we operate on. Integration with bike and pedestrian amenities, as we like to say, everybody who rides a bus is a pedestrian. We will often, to the extent we can, avoid local access roadways or neighborhoods. We will pursue directness and reliability with our routing and avoiding circuitous deviations in large one-way loops, which are the source of everyone's least favorite out-of-direction travel. Okay. I was imagining there would be a desire to talk about Black Hills High School. So I came prepared to talk about Black Hills High School. My map on the left shows Tumwater. However, the colors, the blue is the attendance boundary of Black Hills High School. The green on the right is the attendance boundary of Tumwater High School. So hard not to understand and capture how many families have an interest in getting their students, getting their children, their youth, student from the school. If our bus could talk, actually they do, we ride them, but we might need AI or something to go this advanced. But if the bus could talk, it might say intercity transit bus stops are distant from Black Hills High School due to operational constraints, not because we are unaware of the need. So, my narrative. The operational complications affecting Black Hills High School. Number one, there's no practical location to terminate southbound service and return north on Little Rock Road. That remains. It's been suggested that we will terminate service within the high school itself, within the high school roadways. Our response to that is use of school roadways have significant limitations, including congestion, pedestrians, uncontrolled traffic blockages, and complications with respondents adhering to protective orders. In other words, individuals who should not be by law on school grounds. Neighborhood, it's also been suggested that we could terminate service in some of the adjacent subdivisions. Again, our response to that, neighborhood and local access roadways are also risky for many of the reasons that I mentioned with schools. And residents are often intolerant of fixed route transit operating within their neighborhood. Moving on, service beyond 77th Way isn't yet justified. And a decision to do so would come at a very high operational cost. So much so that it would force us to consider where to compensate. We'd have to dilute service elsewhere in the system to compensate for such a drastic addition down to 93rd. Questions about that?
I have a question. That is, maybe in general terms, not just this particular location, but most acute, is, you know, what if Tumwater somehow offset or helped fund that operational? So it's not all your responsibility. It's not all intercity transit's money. It might be a partnership.
Wouldn't be unprecedented. It'd also be risky for me to talk too much at that without Emily's help, so.
Well, I would point to our relationship with the Evergreen State College. We have a nightline that runs is kind of a way to make sure that folks have a safe way to get home if they go downtown and enjoy downtown has to offer. And so we do have a contract with them, and they do provide funding to offset the cost. So it's certainly not unheard of. And I think it's something we could do for, you know, the possibility of to commit to anything, but
I'm asking out of the blue. I'm not representing this.
We do have another template.
Seems like sometimes we're chicken and egg. We want to keep density and development fairly close by, but we can't offer a transit transportation kind of element to help that work. And we can't also get the transit service on account of we haven't got the, okay. class.
I don't know what the technical term is, but if you offer like a supplemental line that, say, like the 12 that runs down Little Rock, sort of like a 12A or 12B that, would run for, say, like early in the morning and then early in the afternoon, that would be able to service like Black Hills students, would that be another feasible option?
So it doesn't resolve the terminal issue that we have. However, that also that's done. Interestingly, in some of the conversations that I've had with parents and advocates for not only Black Hills, but other schools as well, that student mobility goes beyond just the 8 a.m. and 3 p.m. Many of the students who really need access to transit are for reasons that we might not think about, obviously, like Running Start or after-school activities. For example, I was told that a young lady plays volleyball. She has practice, and there's a gap between the time when school lets out and volleyball practice begins. And by district policy, she's not allowed to be on the campus and has to be somewhere for about 90 minutes. And so looking at the bus for those types of reasons to help students, after 3 o'clock in the afternoon. So yeah, there would be limitations to that. I will say candidly that when decisions like that are made to do that type of supplementing, it's usually the response of political pressure. Often, my experience is it's short-lived because people who are trying to rely on it get frustrated at the absence of the consistency. So, Matt, Peter, anybody with? Yeah. It's not that it can't be done. It's mixed results. Okay, we'll end with some fun photos here. Some of our bus stops and zones, I want to just kind of highlight some of the nuances that we see that a lot of people probably drive by and never pay attention to. So bus stops with pull-out lanes, that's a common design in Tumwater. I think that goes back to language. It's probably actually still recognized within the code. Certainly pull-outs are advantageous for bus stops that are distinguished as time points because the bus might actually be sitting for time longer than an ordinary stop. They do require a bit of extra time for buses to enter, exit traffic and re-enter. While that might sound kind of nominal, it adds up. It adds up actually quite a bit pretty quick. They're costly to construct as well. Curbside and shoulder stops, by contrast, often allow a simpler design, less expensive to install. One of their downsides is when you have that situation where the bus is kind of straddling the traffic lane, maybe it's halfway in and it's encroached into the bike lane. Motorists, a little bit impatient, as do bicyclists, and are very willing to make unsafe passing maneuvers. A couple of photos not in Tumwater. We've got one in Lacey. Device, you might be able to take advantage of this one here, 6th Avenue. The other one, photo on the right, Capitol Way, the new childcare facility adjacent to Capitol campus. Both showing either an in-lane or a bulb-out stop. These are the favored design for us at this time for non-time point bus stops. They maximize speed and reliability. They minimize the conflicts with travelers that I spoke about a moment ago. They provide additional sidewalk area. They're not perfect. They can cause traffic delays. Nobody really enjoys being stuck behind the bus. However, back to fare-free reduces dwell times. Because we no longer have to force a cash transaction at the front of the bus for every person that gets on the bus. Similar to pullouts, they can have a higher construction cost, depending on their design. All right, street trees and vegetation. The photo on the left happens to be one of my all-time favorites here in Tumwater. 2nd Avenue and I, looking southbound. That white thing is a bus stop sign for Route 68. When the trees or the vegetation gets a little bit, unwildly, that sign disappears. So we're always battling the beautiful green that we enjoy in this part of the country. Photo on the right from Lacey, it's actually on Ruddle. It's just, an image is worth 1,000 words, right? So the complications we have with the street trees. At interstate transit, we love buses. We love street trees. Sometimes we don't love buses with street trees. Pedestrian access. The photo on the left, up at the county auditor's election building, which, by the way, Emily and I had the opportunity to tour with Auditor Mary Hall at the facility, election ballot processing facility. If you haven't done that tour, I highly recommend it. It was fascinating. I mean, I can nerd out on just about anything, but I really enjoyed learning kind of behind the scenes what happens at the elections office. Sadly, the current state of the bus stop outside that office looks pretty primitive. We are in a joint project with the county to make improvements to this project. Maybe difficult to see, but there's a concrete extension that the county has added, and then as part of our bus stop enhancement for 2025, we're going to be pouring one of our landing pads in this area. Dial-a-lift, as I mentioned on the right, again, for any area within our service area that is unreliably accessible, paratransit is the response to that, offering I wrote curb to curb, door to door service for those residents. Transit service is expensive, period. ADA paratransit is exceptionally expensive to operate. As I like to joke, my job is to put my colleague Kevin out of business. He's our dial-lift manager. Because ideally, we would love to have a system that's accessible to the point where our demand for ADA paratransit is low. To do that, obviously, we need a robust pedestrian network that can help people have reliable access to their bus stops. Not just outside their home, but every destination they're trying to get to. Don't worry, I'm almost done. Operability, so we talked about this. All those red X's are indications of areas where we have examined an expansion of fixed route transit service and failed due to some complication getting to those hard to reach places. So turning around, as we talked about, school zones, pedestrian access, lighting, reliability. Talk about that for a second. Sometimes we'll take criticism because we'll hear things like, well, the school bus can make that left turn. Yes, school bus does make that left turn. And it's not that the intercity transit bus can't make the left turn. The school bus makes it twice a day. We make it 40 times a day. So there's a reliability factor. Traffic control, uncontrolled intersections, intersection geometry, roundabouts, private roads, on-street parking, all elements that get baked into the design of fixed route transit. Remember nothing else from my presentation, probably take this home with you. Operability is arguably the most significant influence on fixed route design. So when will they ever add the stop, closer bus stop? Well, equity, density, eligibility, and operability are really the things that we're looking for. So in the end, transit is the result of a harmony of considerations, both the qualitative and the quantitative. I'm particularly excited for my last slide. Nick's rolling his eyes. Wheels on the bus go round, yep. Also, the new wider doors. So again, with our fare-free status, the emphasis being on the rear of the bus, We have purchased buses, more recently with the wider rear doors, because the rear doors have become the de facto front door of the bus. All right, we are ready for questions. I will stop sharing.
I had a question.
No. You went to class, you know the
I
answer.
know, no. Well, earlier in the presentation, you said because of construction, the one bus stop went away. Is that indefinitely, or is that just during construction?
Just during construction.
Okay.
Yeah, Linwood and G Street. We have a few out here on Israel too that are affected with the construction.
I was gonna say, there's a lot of construction going on, so,
And that's typical, we have, there's a lot of energy that goes into coordinating with the jurisdictions, especially during construction season, but then once construction ends, then we get into other events and parades and other activities and so forth. I don't think we have very many days on the calendar where the system is running without some sort of disruption.
This planning commission spent a lot of time talking about how we can help get more affordable housing in Tumwater. We've talked about how we can reduce parking for people to park. They would need a bus to get going. And both of those seem to be running up against a hard wall because of the lack of public transportation. Address that.
Our long-range plan is aspirational in the sense that not only the span of service that would operate, not 24/7, we don't have that capacity, but to operate, later into the evening, to be able to support the majority of the mobility needs within the community. And then the frequency. If anybody uses the bus with any degree of regularity, you'll quickly discover that frequency is freedom, and it is really limiting to try to rely on transit when the bus comes hourly. Even half hourly is difficult. So we do not have the ability to have the robust, volume of service that metropolitan areas like Seattle and such would have. And at this time, we that's not within our capacity to get to that level. Not to sell ourselves short, we think service till 11 p.m. every 30 minutes is a very nice offering for the majority of mobility needs within the community.
I would just add, I worked for the Department of Commerce and Growth Management Services there, and did a lot of work around transit-oriented development. The more that you can focus, encourage, and incentivize development of affordable housing on corridors, the existing corridors within our community, that's going to really help bolster our case, as Rob talks about the population that's around these areas, particular focus on equity and those who need us the most. That really makes it easier for us to be able to provide both the span and seeing pretty heavy investments in the Martin Way corridor, similar way with the BRT light that we're running with the one. And because we're able to run multiple routes through that area, you get increased frequency, whether you're getting on a 65 A, B, or the one. Just the nature of that development that's been happening.
The only reason we have multiple routes is because we have two.
Right.
And most of our development along the corridor already developed. So what we've been looking for as a group, where can we put in multi-family housing, which is about the only type of housing that's going to be affordable at this particular time, which means that it's probably on areas where there's not that bus route right now, which means there should be some kind of a conversation between those that are trying to develop affordable housing and those that are providing transportation. Now, maybe it's like build it and they will come approach, but it's going to be hard to get a developer to put in low-income housing for people that don't have cars, where there is no public transportation.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the conundrum that we're faced with, and we've got
I don't know, Brad, you couldn't say how much of a population figure we have forecasted to advance on next 30 years. We can't,
We're looking
can't
at,
come close to meeting both requirements.
we're looking at over 6,000 new housing units affordable for 80% under over the next 20 years, which translates loosely to about 15,000 people. So, yeah. We're concerned right now because our corridors are, as you know, are pretty narrow, just because of the nature of the topography and a few other reasons, and we're just trying to figure it out.
We are in a chicken and an egg situation, you know, absolutely, in the sense that, New City Transit is prepared to expand service geographically in Tumwater. As we described, the operational, limitations are there. And often growth, you know, there's the hope that growth pays for itself and that those roadway improvements come as a result of, development, which means we're in a holding pattern until that happens. So it's a catch-22. I was gonna say, thought I saw one of my,
I was just going to mention that I do think the collaboration we have now, though, is much, much better, so that we're in the know earlier about development, potential developments. And that wasn't always the case in the past. So I think that just being at the table, transit being at the table, I think that increases the likelihood that we're in on the ground level of those conversations. And Rob and his staff really have paved the way for that, those connections.
right, and, a productive conversation with the folks who are looking at the development, in the vicinity of 99 and 93rd, to include, roundabout improvements. And that's really the type of improvements that would be the game changer for inner city transit.
So this is just speaking from my own personal experience, and, obviously, the experience of others may vary. I'm pretty fortunate to live right next to the bus stop for the 12 line. So that's L&I to downtown Olympia. I usually take it to go downtown. It's, great, it's frequent. The hard part I've been having is that ever since I started this new job over in Lacey, I know there's not really a good way to connect the 12 to the Lacey buses. It's at the point where I mapped it out, and it takes me, if I'm driving straight shot from my home to my office, without traffic, 10 to 15 minutes. If I wanted to take the bus, it would take at least an hour and at least two buses. So how do you, because, I think the 12 is like it's the biggest route in Tumwater. It's the major, north-south arterial for,
On the west side. On the west side, for sure.
On the west side, yeah. But then the fact that it's like, I can go north and south very easily and quickly, but if I want to go east to west from there, it's a lot harder to get the timing right, to get the nexus point from, if I wanted to go from Tumwater to Lacey, or, I guess, you take the Capitol, what's the one that goes to Capitol Mall if you want to go to the west side, but, obviously then if you want to go from Tumwater to Lacey and then from Lacey to Pierce County, you're adding a lot of extra time. So, in my calculation, would I be willing to, take a bus if it meant, take a bus to work if it was 20 to 30 minutes versus a 10-minute drive? Probably. Would I be willing to wake up an hour early to go to work? Then, probably not. What's the answer to, that particular type of issue?
Sure. I'm getting looks back there because they know I'm ready to pounce.
You just said it up perfectly. It's wildest dreams.
I know, right? So, you might have captured in all my things that I said, that we are getting prepared to restructure our fixed route network for a variety of reasons, to include more of those crosstown, connections. I would be excited to share more, but I shouldn't.
But it is on your mind. That's good to know.
Yeah. So there'll be more information coming about that for sure, and we will expect public comment.
Thank you for writing. Truly, because I write as well, and, but I'm also kind of spoiled. I live between two routes, the 68 and the 94, kind of in East Olympia High School, and yeah, just thank you for riding with us, because that means a lot to know that folks that are, making community decisions are giving us, their ridership, so thank you.
Well, I mean, and it's, I take the bus every time for the big events downtown, Arts Walk,
Yeah.
Harbor Days,
Absolutely.
Pride, all those things where you don't have to fuss with parking.
Right.
That's,
Yep.
Well, if I can just add, that's a great example of a place that we really try to engage folks who, bus maybe doesn't work as a great option, or they're working from home. We partnered with the city around Falls Fest to not only offer a valet bike parking through our walk and roll program at the park, but we also encourage people to park at Peter G. Schmidt and, the Department of Health and ride the 13 in, to be able to, help with the parking issues. There was no parking down there that day when that was going on. But we also, it's just a great entry point for the bus system. We hear from a lot of folks who, it doesn't work great for my commute, and I encourage them, well, come use it to come down for Arts Walk or the procession, downtown. Then they get on the bus, it's cleaner than they expect, it's nicer, the bus driver is friendly, and maybe that means they'll ride there occasionally.
Mr. Kirkpatrick?
I support, bringing transit, down Highway 99, but I don't think there are any plans or opportunities for low-income housing along that route. Most of the people that live that far out of town are gonna have a car. Some of them have two cars. So what we need is transit on inner city areas where a developer will come in and put in a six-story, multifamily apartment building with a certain number of, low-income housing units mandated in it. And, until, again, we can't build it and hope that in the future, transit will come to it. We've got to find a transit route where that facility can be built.
For the incentive. Mhm. Well, I foresee continued conversations with Brad and Erica. Are we starting tomorrow?
I wonder, as a, off your, your exploration of reviewing, restructuring it. You mentioned early on the on-demand service that you don't have to find with trying out. Can you describe what that looks like compared to dial?
Much the same, really. The key difference would be, for someone who's dial-a-lift, eligible, they're used to a next day reservation requirement, whereas on-demand, doesn't have that. It operates more like Uber.
Interesting, because because you went there, I'm wondering, is that an opportunity to contract with Uber or a Lyft kind of thing to put the service out there?
I see Peter back there twitching from his days at Pierce Transit.
They're super difficult with
Sure.
them, and collecting data from the ridership has proven to be really difficult, and it's not cost effective for them. Very few on-demand services are cost effective. Talking about minimal ridership and small vehicles. So it's really a tough nut to crack. But there are some other opportunities, contract with some other providers. First mile, last mile.
And that was something I was going to add, another way that it's unlike, dial-a-lift paratransit service, instead of door-to-door, it's usually door. So it's taking people maybe that live in a far out area that a fixed route doesn't go to, and then getting them to the system, the transit system, you. So as Peter described, it's sort of last mile, first mile, as opposed to that door.
Either.
Yeah,
Q transit.
definitely the way the industry, and there are a lot of people messing around with it, and technology makes that easier too, right? Utilization of common systems, scheduling, and everything else. But yeah, I don't know of anybody who's doing it super cost effectively, and successfully right now.
Some of the areas, going back to the comment about being able to accommodate, more of the community's demand, maybe 24/7 is, using on-demand services to augment late-night buses, that I think has a lot of merit. When you're looking at using on-demand to augment, geography, that's gonna come with a similar price tag as Dial-A-Lift operationally. But if after, 9:30, 10 o'clock at night, rather than 40 buses running through the system, if we can, knock that into 25 or something like that, then that's meaningful for us from an operation perspective.
Online, you can tell we're kind of interested in it. From my point of view, the affordability notion is not just the cost of housing, but the cost of transport in terms of money or, to have a car or do whatever, or time, find your transport. It's the there that provides affordability that people try to calculate when they're making a decision about where to live or where to go work. That kind of thing.
I'm not moving because of the buses, I promise you that.
But, I just say that, we're glad you're here and we're glad you're working on these tough problems and they're complicated. It's not just a single facet, a single dimension that we're looking at.
Harmony of considerations, as I brought it home in my presentation, yeah.
Any other comments, remarks? Or others?
Yes, and thank you to my backup singers, yeah.
All right, then. Well, thank you again for coming out in force. And I feel smarter already. Brad, do you want to go to our development code discussion?
Give me just a moment to.
Thank you.
So what I'd like to do, first of all, I'll share this stuff.
Green one in the middle. Okay.
Be patient. Which I.
The development code right in the middle,
Apologies.
maybe share?
Yep, so you can officially see my.
There, let's see.
One of the issues we're having with stuff is we're running it off actually the web.
Oh. I would just ask, I think you just stopped sharing.
This is really exciting. Once we get to it, you're gonna be.
Microsoft Edge tab.
Okay.
There you
Hey,
go.
Thank you. All right.
Something
I
changed.
wanted to share my transit story about the reason I purchased my house 20 years ago was because it was on a transit route and I never used it for work but we'll talk about it another time. The same reason you have of getting from. Anyway, what I'd like to do tonight is run through, the highlights of the staff report that I provided as part of your packet. The intent is, to set you up for your next meeting where you're gonna get a copy of the ordinance. The ordinance is gonna be fairly thick in size. We're over 100 pages already. Looking forward to, actually, what the final count is, We're not gonna break the record, I think, which is 167, right? But it's important, and it's lengthy because it touches on so many different sections of the code. What we're doing in general as part of this process is part of Senate Bill 5290. Again, remind everybody, state law has changed, and when the city reviews development applications, we do so under a process that's established by RCW 3670B. And that sets out what we look at, how long we have to look at, the steps we need to do, and all of those kinds of things. So when changes in state law happen, we need to update our processes, our codes, to meet that new set of regulations. One thing that is different from us than maybe from some other jurisdictions is we haven't really touched Title 14, which is our development administration chapter, in a while. Probably since the last time the state updated the development regulations in '96.
You're laughing.
When I started in the profession and Terry was in his 10th year on the commission, so it's been a little bit of a while. So there are a lot of things that we're sort of looking at in addition to the state mandated stuff to update. So what I'd like to do is I want to make sure I hit some of the highlights of the process, so you have an understanding of sort of how it all should work before you actually see it. I'm going to run through this process diagram, which I think is a good way to introduce you to the process. I'm going to try to hit on some big concepts that are touched on in the ordinance, and then I'll answer any questions that we have after that. So the development review process, as it's currently structured, has 5 different steps. And I apologize, I'm just going to have to do this and try to explain each of the process steps. So we start with the first step of an applicant wanting to do something with their property. Now, that applicant could be us, it could be the school district, it could be commercial, a Fred Meyer wanting to locate, it could be a subdivision, whatever. There's an idea out there of what we want to do. And the first step for us in the process is to talk with the applicant about what their idea is, sort of walk them through the upcoming review process, explain everything that needs to be part of that process ahead of time. So they have time to put together their applications. Those applications could be, they know what to look for and what to provide. So when we get the applications in, our review is shortened because it's easier for us to go through the information they provide. It meets the intent, it meets the requirements. So we have a 2-step pre-application process. The first step is a feasibility review, which is I've got a drawing on a napkin I want to show you. It doesn't involve any written comments from us. It's very much I just want to show you something. What do you think? Is it possible? Kind of thing. The second part of the review is actually a requirement, and it's our pre-application conferences. There's a preliminary and then there's a final step. So those 2 are required unless they're waived, say, for a smaller application type. The idea here is the applicant comes in with a fairly complete application. We take a look at it, we meet with them in person. Our development review committee meetings are every Thursday morning and sometimes in the afternoon. All of our development review committee agendas are posted on our website. If you're curious on what we're hearing, what we're seeing, that's updated weekly, and we probably have the list going back to 2022 of everything that we've seen and heard. So it's a public process too. Once we've had the preliminary discussion and the applicant has made any necessary revisions to the application, we have a final pre-application process. And that's really where we say, yes, this application looks good to go. Go ahead and submit it. Here is the list of all the things you need to submit as part of the application. And one of the things you'll hear me talk about as part of this process is procedural requirements for applications. The procedural part is the brand new part from state law. It's what it says essentially is for us to do our processing, we have to be very explicit about what we ask for. We need a site plan that contains this, 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 and this. We need a traffic study that covers this, in that level of detail. Once an application, and this is the sort of the between process as part of the pre-app process and the application submittal process, is determining what the application type is. This is a new step that we're adding to our process because we're looking at ways, because state law has mandated that 3 different permit types have 3 different timelines specified in state law. First level is 60-day review, which is for a simpler permit. And by permit, I mean land use permit, not a building permit, not a construction permit. We'll get into that in more detail. So we've set up a system of types that basically set not only the requirements of the timeline, but also who gives the decision, who can appeal it, and all of these, and how noticing is done and so forth. So I'll walk you through that. We also have the application submittal itself, and that's where I talked about the procedural things that are needed for a complete application and how that's defined. That translates immediately into what's called a determination of completeness. So somebody comes in with an application, they've gotten, our checklist for a particular permit. Here's all you need. It's been modified at the Development Review Committee if that's needed. And the city has 28 days under state law to review a full submittal and say, yes, you've got everything, we can start review. It doesn't preclude the city from asking for additional information as review starts. So say, for example, we've got a 400-page stormwater study. We're not going to review the entire stormwater study in that 28 days and say everything looks hunky-dory. It looks like you've got all the elements that we need in the table of contents to cover our requirements. That determination of completeness is also important because once we issue that, that starts the formal clock. Currently, under pre-existing state law, it was 120 days to review an application. Now we've got the 60, 75, 170, or whatever it is. And the importance of that is once we say an application is complete, we have to do our review, which means do the SEPA review, issue the notice of applications. We have to get a recommendation to either the director for some of the permits or the hearing examiner. The hearing examiner has to hold the hearing. The hearing examiner has to issue their decision. So all of that has to happen within that time frame. So say, for example, you do a preliminary plat that requires hearing examiner approval. From the time we get the application and say it's complete to the time that the hearing examiner issues the final decision, 170 days. Typically, with all the noticing and everything, there's a lot of time built in there that we have 14 days for the notice of application. We have 14 days for the SEPA determination that comes out. You have 7 days to appeal the SEPA. We have X number of days to get the application to the hearing examiner. The hearing examiner has to turn that around and issue a decision within a set time. So it gets crowded. The other issue is during application review process, there'll be times that we need to stop the clock on the review. We are reviewing an application and we come across an issue that needs more information that either doesn't meet current state or city codes, all of those kinds of things. And we need to send it back to the applicant with a list of here's what we have found that you need to address, written list, letter. We sent out a review letter as part of this process. If an application is going well, we only do that maybe a couple times during the process. We do have instances where we have multiple times we've had to go out. Either the applicant is not responding to the previous letter or another issue comes up when they try to solve the previous problem, all those kinds of things. So there are multiple opportunities and issues with stopping the clock. So we're not counting the full 170 days or whatever when an applicant is responding to our comment. One thing that is a thing that sort of formally initiates after the determination of completeness that lets the public know that something is happening on a permit side is what is known as a notice of application. Under state law, we can issue a notice of application for projects that require SEPA review. or projects that require a hearing examiner decision. Typically, they're both the same. If you do SEPA, you're gonna trigger a hearing exam. There are applications that don't require SEPA. For example, we've raised our SEPA level exemptions now for 9 lots for a short plat and 60 units for a multifamily development. When we did those SEPA amendments to raise it above the bare minimum that the state had established, we had included some language saying, we're gonna issue a notice of application for these because we know from our conversations with the tribes, with the public, the community, that these projects are gonna attract interest and people wanna know what's happening. It appears from our current review of the state law, we can't do that. We can't issue a quote-unquote notice of application and have a comment period associated with it for those things that are below the SEPA threshold. It's just excluded under state law. We're trying to figure out a way to try to address that. So just be aware that's one of the ongoing things we're thinking about how to do it. Now, we've had discussions about the SEPA process and why we've tried to pull it back, because in our estimation, all those things that have been covered by SEPA in 1971 are really now all covered by our development code. So it's just an additional process that doesn't accomplish anything if it's already addressed in the development code. But it has a very important public notice aspect that's still used by a lot of folks. Once we issue the notice of application, we also send out the application for review. That means it goes to the different city departments that may be affected by that. It also goes out to outside agencies, like intercity transit, if there's a bus stop involved or some change in transit route, or, you know, school district and so forth, if it affects particular things. So there's a lot of communication and requirements for amount of time to review and all that kind of stuff. SEPA review starts if it's required. We have the approval timelines that I've talked about. And then ultimately, at the end of that third phase application review, we issue a recommendation for decision. Now that, again, the decision could either be by the director or it could be by the hearing examiner. Part 4 is the actual decision being issued and also the hearing process. So language in Title 14 addresses all of those instances. And then the 5th step is the application appeal process. Anytime we issue a decision or the hearing examiner issues a decision, there's an opportunity for appeal. And where those appeals go depends on the type of permit. Any questions on the general short brief besides Eric? Erica?
I don't know if we touched on this or not. Did we talk about why those timeframes are important and what that means for staff in the city?
We're getting there.
Okay, perfect.
It's in there. I want to hold your attention because
Okay.
this actually do
Okay.
mean something.
Yeah,
Thank you, Eric.
okay.
I can't see if any. Like not.
Thank
Oh,
you.
Commissioner Kirkpatrick, though.
So the timelines are 100% within step 3. Timelines not impact 4 and 5.
It will affect 3 and 4. It's the decision process is included in the timeline.
Timelines then are from notice of application, notice of decision.
So the key thing is the start here, this notice of completeness at the end of phase 2, and then 3 and 4 fall into the timeline, which ends with a decision being issued.
But step 2 has its own clock, the 28-day clock?
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, so 28 days here, and then whatever is established by permit type here. And then there's also separate timelines for appeals to be filed, depending upon where they go. And
Sub-clocks within 3.
so if you love timekeeping and clock stop management, this is for you. And I'm not exactly joking. So very quickly, we touched on this, I think, the briefing last time. The intent is to basically rewrite the entire Title 14 and start with something new. So the structure of the new 14 is very simply, the first section deals with general provisions that apply throughout the code. Whether we're talking about definitions, applicability, time limits, noticing, all those kinds of things that really apply all across the code. In the next chapters, the chapters 1404, 1406, and so forth, start going into the process itself. 1404 deals with the land use permits, and we'll talk a little bit about what that is and the types and all those requirements. The pre-application process is part of 1406. The submittal process, that's what's in the application and determination of completeness process, is 1408. The review of those applications is part of 1410, and the decision and appeal process is part of 1412. So the idea is you could pick up the code and basically follow the process through as you do that. A couple things I want to touch on in terms of the first section dealing with the intent and applicability of the code changes. This is actually language taken directly from the RCW, and this is part of the intent statement for the title. And the intent statement is basically to lay out why we're doing this and what's intended to be done by having this code in the first place. One of the very important things as part of the review process is that at this point, this is, I'll just read this. Fundamental land use planning choices made in the city's comprehensive plan and development regulations will serve as the foundation for land use permit review. The review of a proposed project consistency with applicable regulations or in the absence of applicable regulations means that the city's adopted comprehensive plan shall be incorporated into the determination made by this title. If you're asking about what the importance of the comp plan is, it's also a backstop for our development regulations. It's an essential part of a permit review process. If there are holes in our development regulations, our comprehensive plan is the backstop. So if we say we need to do something or have a traffic study done in a particular area, and it's not explicit in our regulations, and it's kind of hazy, but the comp plan says, we anticipate as part of future development of this area of the city, we're going to need this, then the comp plan is drawn into that process. So another way how this all ties together. But this is important because this is sort of the basis of why we're doing this in the first place on the permit review side. Another really big thing that I want to touch on is also leads into the discussion of the definitions. Our definitions, for the most part, are taken directly from the RCWs with some minor tweaks. One important change that was made in 5290 in the definition section of 3670B was that a project permit definition, and the project permit is defined as a land use or environmental permit or a license required from a local government, such as, one of the important things that was taken out by the state legislation was building permits. And that's important because that's kind of a sea change for how things are done here. What they're left with are things, and this is important because Title 14 no longer has to address issues with building code review, how long they take, how they coordinate with anything. There are things in there, but they're not. Our Title 15 buildings and construction, which is based on a whole other section of the RCW, now controls, but still controls, more importantly, and there's less room for confusion. But it narrows the focus of Title 14 to actions that are taken under Title 16, which is our environment code, so SEPA, trees, land clearing, all critical areas. Title 17, which is our land division code. That means if you're subdividing by either a short plat or a larger preliminary plat or a binding site plan, or you're making a change to a boundary line, all those kinds of things fall under the processes we're going to be talking about here. And then Title 18. which is zoning, which covers things like plan unit developments, variances, site plan review is gonna be a new thing we're gonna be talking about, and all of those things, landscaping, parking lots, signage, all of those things. So just to give you an idea of the scope of 14, that's what it covers. We talked a little bit about the applicability side, and I'm gonna go over that. We talked about a little bit the importance of some of the definitions in here. What I'm gonna do for your next meeting, in addition to giving you the ordinance, is update all the language in the staff report. So again, we'll keep the same format, but the code language that we cite, which is directly from the ordinance, will be there too. So it hopefully will help you, rather than try to look at a whole 107 pages of strike through, to actually see the language and in a way that's all there, and it's, this is what's being proposed. Time limits, we talked a little bit about stopping and starting the clock. There's a whole section that talks about how things are done that way. If there's a request from the applicant to pause review of an application, things like that are dealt with. The thing that Erica was very excited about was what happens if we don't meet the timeline? Well, we pay a penalty, a financial penalty under state law. We have to refund a portion of the project application fees if we don't do so. So this is a new section of the code that says if we don't do something within an appropriate time frame, we refund 10% of the application fees. If we don't do it beyond that, it's a 20% of refund. So there's now officially a penalty assigned if we don't hit the shot clock. Before it was, yeah, you didn't do it, but.
So just, oh, go ahead, Commissioner Kirkpatrick.
I noticed later on it says that your, city council decides what the permit, fees are gonna be.
Mm-hmm.
Seems to me that, to plan your next set of fees, put enough money in there to cover 10 to 20%. And that will continue to spiral until we figure, that maybe.
Well, we've thought about that, if we just charge enough upfront to cover our costs, and if we have to get back some, we still cover our costs. The first very important thing to understand is our permit application fees now don't cover our costs at all. If they did, they'd probably be too much and probably kill development, including affordable housing developments and everything else that we want to see as part of the process. So fees are really sort of a game of how much can we have a fee without essentially stopping what we want to see happen. And we have to be reasonable with our fees. And while we would like to be able to say we can cover our costs with them, that's not the reality. We don't. We can't without stopping what we do. So we have to figure out other ways. But that's,
The other thing is, take the bus example, charge no fees, we're only gonna give them 20% back, 20%.
That's actually, thank you, Erica. No, we're not doing that.
No, I think that's why it's so important that we identify permit types, type 1 through 4, and establish the pre-application meeting and making sure that upfront the applicants know what needs to be submitted for a complete application so that staff can get the reviews done in a timely manner. That's essentially what we're trying to achieve with this, and that's why we're redoing all of Title 14, is just to help the process. And then another kind of caveat to that is our new system. So getting a system, a permitting system.
Yeah, so what we have here is sort of the regulations and external process that we use. What's not seen and what's not going to be discussed here is sort of the internal processes that we have to do. First of all, with the new system-wide computer system that's coming in for permit tracking, for example, or permit management. That's everything from paying the permits to managing the time, to everything else. the processes that we go through for taking in an application, reviewing it, sending it out, all those things are sort of not dealt with by code. It's actually the practical procedures that we're also doing at the very same time. What is also not part of the regulations, but is part of state law, is a reporting requirement. We now have a requirement to report on all of our permitting and all of the timelines of everything that we're doing on an annual basis. And we're trying to figure out how we're going to do that. Because currently our computer system isn't set up to let us do that. And so we might have to have another system built on top of it in order to allow us to stop time, count the hours, count the days, all those kinds of things to do the reporting. Our permit manager hopefully won't retire in the next couple days. So our job is to keep her happy so we actually get that into place. And she's willing to do the work, we just don't want to overwhelm her.
Brad, will Title 14 house the fee schedule?
No, the fee schedule is something that is adopted on an annual basis by resolution by the city council, and includes not only land use fees and building permit fees and impact charges, and it's also, I want to get a copy of something from the city clerk. It costs X number of cents per copy to get, that. So it covers everything, or recreation fees or things like that. So it's a broad.
Necessarily see reference in where that lives.
Yeah, that lives on its own. We also have a section about noticing, who gets noticed when, how we do it. And that's, we have to do a lot of updating, obviously, since things, newspapers of records are still required, but they're no longer anywhere near the primary source of information. We have a new section. Go ahead, Terry.
I'm gonna make a comment on that. There are pluses and minuses to having, time,
Mm-hmm.
and public involvement is one of the losers in this process. Something has to be done within 2 weeks of, when document signed by somebody. Somebody living down on 93rd Avenue isn't gonna hear about it.
Yep.
They aren't gonna have the opportunity. So,
It's always,
clearly our legislators are smarter than we are, and they taken that into account. Public doesn't count in this graph. So, stuck with it. Definitely gonna negatively affect public involvement.
yeah, I'm not gonna argue that. I mean, we had a good conversation with other jurisdictional staff on Monday about what they're doing, the county, Olympia, Lacey, and so forth. That was definitely some information we heard, because some jurisdictions, it's community noticing and community involvement is job one. Making sure everybody's on board with the proposal, that all voices are heard, all those kinds of things, and then how you make it work with this is another thing. I think in my mind, it really highlights the work that you do now in terms of the development code and the comprehensive plan, all of those things that set the table for ultimate permit review. All of that stuff becomes very important, and more importantly, community input at this time becomes even more important. Because, once the requirements are out there, we're under the shot clocks, we're under the time frames. This is the time now to have the influence, to have the discussions.
With that, is that the folks, out wherever something might eventually, applications aren't gonna know it.
Mm-hmm.
Well, we had planning commission a couple of years ago.
Yeah, and adopting the brewery district plan, and then 10 years later, wondering why we're having this roundabout put in, for example. There's a lag time.
I wonder if there's on that point, if there's a way to, somehow emphasize that shift where the public needs, or somehow make up the difference. I don't know what it is.
Another new section that we're gonna be dealing with is, substantially different proposals. And what that means is I submit an application, and then either through my choice or in meeting, city regulations, the project changes to such a degree, it's not the same project. It has more impacts, has different impacts. You know, I'm taking access from a different road than I started, all these kinds of things. And so this section establishes the process for how we deal with that. And what constitutes a brand new application and what constitutes just a modified. But I just want to call your attention to that. We also have a land use expiration section that I've talked about, what that's actually going to mean. Expirations. Once a permit is issued, with the exception, there's usually a timeline for somebody taking action. For example, I get a preliminary plat approval. What that is a approval from the city saying that this paper division of land is acceptable. It's on me now to actually build it and to do so within 5 years, which is the state mandated time. Otherwise, that approval goes away. If you don't act on a conditional use, it's an 18-month expiration date, those kinds of things. So this section addresses those. So there is a finite time limit on these applications. And that's one of the changes and one of the things that has to be made more clear, I think, in the revisions that is in current. Because we have some issues where we've got permits that are outstanding that were filed a while ago, but there's really no way of saying, no more. You have to meet current regulations, not what was 10 years ago. We also talk about some general things here. I'll just go right into the procedures and types. These are the four, first of all, the four application types, type 1, type 2, 3, and 4. Type 1 applications are those applications that do not require SEPA review. And some examples include boundary line adjustments, home occupation permit. I want to do something at my house that involves work. There's a permit that involves that. Shoreline exemption, sign permits, street permits, and those kinds of things fall under that category. Type 2 are all type 1 permits that require some level of environmental review. So one thing that has been added to this list since you've seen it is site plan review is a type 1 permit. So for example, I come in and I want to do a multifamily development, or I want to do an industrial development. The use is allowed outright. I don't have any critical areas or anything like that. So all I'm doing is just getting approval to build the project I want to build. If there's no SEPA required, if they're below the threshold of 10,000 square feet, they are a type 1 approval, and then they follow that process. If they're above that, or they have critical areas on their site, or they have shoreline, they're kicked up to the type 2, which is a different requirements in terms of noticing and some of that. That's just an example. Type 3s are everything that goes to the hearing exam. And typically, all those also have environmental review. That's like a preliminary plat, that is a conditional use permit, all of those kinds of things. And type 3s are part of Title 14, but they're also kind of exempt from a lot of these things. It's all the work that you're doing. It's updating the comprehensive plan. It's updating the development regulations. It's changing maps, the zoning maps. All of those things are different animals, but are still land use permits, but they're different in the sense that they have a recommendation by the planning commission, city council makes the final decision. In no other case does the planning commission get involved or the city council get involved in any permit application. That's semi-intentional. It takes the political element out of project review. It means do you meet the standards that are in the code or you don't? That kind of thing.
Would that apply to planned actions?
Planned actions are a hybrid weird creature. That's sort of our SEPA process and something else. Ultimately, their approval comes through this and the council level. There are, I just wrote the code, so I should know where this sits. It's a different creature.
Okay, so it's not in this, among these.
It's dealt with in Title 14, but it kind of sits between. The best way I can.
Sort of a type 3B.
Yeah, it's its own thing. The next table in 1404 deals with decision and appeal authorities. So just to walk you through this table, for each of the types, there is a recommendation body, there is a hearing body, if there is one assigned, and then there's the decision authority. And then ultimately, there's who hears an appeal if there's an appeal. So, type 1 applications, the recommendation, DRCs is the Development Review Committee, which is made up of staff. The decision is made by the director, and the director in this case is the Director of Community Development. There is no hearing body as such, it's an administrative decision. Type 2s are structured the same way, so it follows the same format. Type 3s are different. DRCs, again, issue a recommendation with a very special exemption for site-specific rezones for individual properties, which we've never done since I've been here, and probably won't because our comp plan and our zoning maps pretty much match. And if you make one change here, you have to make a change in the other. It's a different process. At this case, the hearing body is the hearing examiner. The hearing examiner has the authority to issue the decision, and appeals either go directly to Superior Court, or in the case of shoreline permits, they go to a special shoreline hearings board, which is now part of a larger state board for hearings. And we talked a little bit about the type 4s, which you have the recommendation, you hold the hearing, council makes the decision, and appeals go to Superior Court. In addition to that, there are specific public notice requirements depending on the type. And we've talked about the notice of completeness. Type 1s under state law don't require one. It's just go for it. And makes it kind of interesting to try to figure out when the clock starts. We haven't figured that one out. But anyway. And notice of applications aren't required. So there's no public notice necessarily that goes out that something's being done. There's no hearing, so there's no hearing, and there's also no notice of a decision that's issued. There's a formal thing called the notice of decision that other things have to do. Those requirements all kick in for type 1 and 2. And then your type 4s are their own special case. This is why they're kind of exempt, because there is a hearing notice, but it doesn't follow this process. It follows a different process spelled out in a different section. Now we get to the actual review times that are established for each of these permit types. Type 1s are 65 days with the special exemption in state law for final plats. Final plat is when you have a preliminary plat approval, you build all the things that you have to basically finish the roads, sell the lots, all those things. The final plat is the document that says you've done all that, congratulations. Go ahead and record this with the county. You know, you now have lots that you can sell. It's a requirement that it's a 30-day turnaround once we get an application in for a final plat. Our language is going to be strengthened a little bit so that 30-day clock doesn't start until we get confirmation from our Public Works Department that all the improvements are in place. We've had instances where somebody files for a final plan application, say, you gotta give us approval within 30 days, and say, you haven't finished building the road. So, anyway, we'll see some things dealing with that. Type 2s are 100 days. Remember, that includes SEPA, which is a 21-day process built into that. Type 3s are 170, except for preliminary plats, which are 90 days for state. Now, I don't think we've ever hit 90 days, and how we're gonna do that, we haven't figured out, because of the hearing requirements, the SEPA requirements, and just making sure you get the application squared away. But that's in the background. You're not subject to any timelines for what you do, aside from obviously wanting to get something out there so the community.
Speaking of timelines, and noting the time, can wrap up in 5 minutes, or
Yep.
should we go to?
I can finish in 5.
Okay, yay.
Okay. The rest of the memo outlines what happens after the application comes into the city for review. And to be honest, this isn't the section that has changed dramatically from what's there. It's been cleaned up a little bit, but it is pretty similar to what we have right now. There's a whole section outlining everything that needs to be in an application, subject to waivers, depending upon the application. There's the determination and completeness process that we talked about. When can we ask for additional information if we don't have it, all the timelines, the notice of application process, all the review things, what it means by consistency. Is the application consistent with the comprehensive plan and the development regulations? What does that mean? Planned actions is talked about as well. Another really important thing I want to touch on is one of the first things that was done in the 96 changes in state law was to consolidate SEPA and land use reviews together. So they have to happen at the same time, which makes sense. So you don't start one and different timelines and everything else. We're also explicitly saying that if I need multiple permits to do my project, I've got a preliminary plat that has critical areas that I'm going to do a planning and development on, or I need a variance for this. All of those applications are bunched together as part of one review, one timeline. It goes to the highest level. So if I've got a 1, 2, and 3, the review is done on the 3 level. So the hearing examiner is going to hear everything, all the permits associated with it. It's going to follow that timeline and all of that. So the idea is all of those things are considered together. So when you're doing a variance, you're looking at it also at the same time, doing everything else and making sure that it all works together. So we've added a section to be explicit about that. Appeals. I want to touch briefly on some additional areas outside of Title 14 that we're looking at. First one is our hearing examiner code. We're going to make some changes in terms of what the hearing examiner hears and how we call it and how we define it, just to make sure we clean that language up. We're going to make a change to our multifamily tax exemption section. Under state law, there's a contract that is approved as part of the multifamily tax exemption that can be approved either by our city council or by administratively. Currently, and under state law, a multifamily tax exemption is approved by our director. The only component of that approval that isn't approved by the director is the contract, which is approved by the city council. When we originally set up the program, we assumed essentially that any contract has to be approved by the city council. We have the flexibility to move all that back into the administrative approval. The issue is city council is basically told that they have to approve this contract because they can't do anything about the actual exemption, which is its director approval, not their approval, which creates frustration because all they get to do is just hear about the project, express frustration with the process, but ultimately have to approve the contract. So we're making some changes. We're also making changes across Title 11, which is our Title of Communications, 13, which is stormwater, buildings and construction. We're adding a section to our zoning code, as I mentioned, that deals explicitly with site plan review. It's a term that we use internally right now. For what we do, we have the site plan review application, but we don't have the code to support it. So we're adding that as part of the process. We have started SEPA review of the ordinance, and we are now officially in your process. So your next meeting, you'll get the full ordinance. You'll get the staff report again, updated. If there are any questions or anything that you see in the materials that you have now, that if you don't have a chance to say tonight, send me what you need, what your question is, and I'll try to build it into the next round. Our request is that we try to have a hearing scheduled for the first meeting in November. The reason for that is under state law, the changes become effective whether we do it or not on January 1st. And our preference obviously is to make sure that our version of it is the one that goes out first.
Just real quickly, one thing that I would like to look for our next meeting would be for many of the developer community or outreach on that.
And that's been one of the difficult things because of the constrained timeline for this whole thing, is that we just haven't had the opportunity. So as part of that discussion, we recognize that we may be doing fixes after the fact for some of these things. And it's not our preferred way of doing things, but it's just such an animal. It's just not working the way that we'd like to do for anything else that we.
Okay, presumably lobbyists for the developers are the ones that push these timelines.
Right?
We are just a wee bit. Okay, yeah, thank you. We are just a wee bit past our usual time. We got a motion.
We're right at 9. We're not beyond. We're-
Okay, I thought it said 9:01 or something over there. Mr. Tobias,
I motion to adjourn.
all right,
I second.
second is by, okay, and also, Commissioner Staff, it looks like, all right. It's been motion moved and seconded that we adjourn tonight. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All righty, we are adjourned. Thanks, everybody.
Have a good night,
So-
everyone. Safe.
Did we have you sign in?
It would
Did you
be-
sign in?
Yeah.
Okay.